Delighted to get things started for this morning. So we're going to be starting with two keynote presentations. So to introduce our speakers for those, I am now very happy to pass over to our chairman, Paul Adamson, who's going to be chairing this morning's session. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And yes, my warm welcome to all of you also back to day 2 of our European Space Conference 2022. It's my great pleasure and great honor to introduce our first keynote presentation of the morning, Martin Kupka, who is the Minister of Transport of the Czech Republic. He has a very long biography and a big CV in front of me, but I will take out some highlights. In the autumn of 2017, Martin was elected a member of the Czech Republic Parliament and defended the seat in the 2021 elections. In January 2014, he was elected by delegates of the 24th Congress of his party, the ODS, as deputy leader. He defended his position at the 25th, 26th, and 27th Congresses, which took place in 2016, 2018, and 2020, respectively. Without further ado from me, Martin, over to you. And thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much for the floor. Good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to say a few words at the European Space Forum 2022, which addresses a range of important and pressing topics for the European space ecosystem. First of all, I would like to use this opportunity and shortly introduce the space activities in the Czech Republic. My country has a long heritage in space activities. Already in 1978, Czechoslovakia entered history as the 3rd country in the world to have its own astronaut. In the same year, it's also launched its first satellite, which provided valuable scientific measurements. However, despite all our successes and scientific achievements, no competitive space industry could grow under the centrally planned communist economy of the time. Only many years later, through cooperation with ESA, significant efforts from Czech industry and strong governmental coordination and support, did the space sector in the Czech Republic get the necessary kickstart to take its place among its European counterparts and become competitive on the international level. Looking at the story of the Czech space sector so far, especially in space upstream, I would consider it a success. The space industry in the Czech Republic is growing every year with dozens of companies that have taken part in hundreds of space projects. We have a solid academic and research background, as well as an active startup scene with more than 40 startups incubated through the ESA Business Incubation Center in Prague and Brno. The next step in space upstream focus mainly on the strengthening of our system integration capabilities. At the same time, we are well aware that the space sector is rapidly evolving and requires constant innovation and adaptation to maintain competitiveness. My ministry, which is responsible for coordinating all space activities in the Czech Republic, together with other ministries and government agencies, actively takes steps to support the growth of the space sector, utilizing ESA and EU programs, taking part in the European level decision-making, organizing events, fostering international cooperation, and other activities. It's also worth to mention that the Czech Republic is proud to be the host country of the EU Agency for the Space Program, EUSPA. Getting to the agenda of this event, yesterday's agenda included the topics of security, sustainability, or the development of Europe's space capabilities, including the planned secure connectivity system. As the country currently holding the EU Council presidency, the Czech Republic places space high among its priorities areas. We are devoting a lot of our attention to the secure connectivity regulation, which is now entering a crucial negotiation phase. We strive to achieve a setup which is ambitious but efficient and corresponds well with Europe's current and future needs and opportunities. The Czech presidency will start a trialogue with the European Parliament and European Commission tomorrow, and our target is to get in the negotiations as far as possible. Another space priority for our presidency is maximizing the potential and benefits of EU space data. We believe that this can only happen on the basis of good cooperation and leveraging synergies between the major European actors, namely the European Commission, EUSPA, and other EU agencies, ESA, as well as EU and ESA member states. Their cooperation and coordination is progressively converging, utilizing the complementary of their roles. This interaction also needs to take into account and respect the differing priorities and positions of individual states, identify the common ground and build upon it. We also have co-organized EU Space Week 2022 at the beginning of October in Prague, and there will be also the Business to Space event at the end of November in Prague, to which I would like to warmly invite you. We also support the European efforts towards space traffic management, establishing a common understanding and approach at the regional level with a goal to ultimately set up a global system. A cornerstone of these efforts is the EU SST framework, which we are just about to join and contribute to through the SST partnership scheme, along with the space traffic management sessions on competitiveness, funding and investment in European space activities from today's agenda. The Czech Republic recognizes the essential role of institutional funding in space activities, as well as the socio-economic benefits the space provides in return. In this context, I cannot avoid mentioning the ESA Council at the ministerial level, which will take place less than a month from now and which will play an important role in shaping European space endeavors in the next years. For the Czech Republic, ESA programs form a key instrument for the support and development of the space upstream sector. Traditionally, space activities have been typically characterized by high risk, high upfront costs, and long development times, which have all made space difficult for private investment. However, with the decreasing costs of access to space, maturing technology, and the proliferation of new space approaches, these barriers for private funding become ever smaller. And private funding is a key element in accelerating the development of space, building bridges to the other sectors of the economy, optimizing efficiency, and pushing innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to reemphasize the ever-increasing significance of space to the lives of everyone in Europe and around the globe, and with that also the importance of events like this one. Opportunities for all the key stakeholders as policymakers, representatives of space agencies, research institutions, industry, investors, or users of space data and services to come together and exchange ideas, information, and opinions. We are talking about defense and security, which are pushed into the foreground by the destabilizing geopolitical situation in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We are talking about facing the challenges of climate change or digital transformation. We are talking about ways to ensure economic growth and the welfare of EU citizens. This cross-cutting range of basic issues on the table reminds us that space is an important part of our future, and that the efforts we put in today will be multiplied tomorrow. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all a great day.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll let you get back to your work, and thank you very much for that kind invitation to your conference in November. I'm sure many people in the room and watching online will want to take part. Thank you very much and have a good day. Right, our next keynote speaker is Angus Lapsley. Angus Lapsley became NATO's Assistant Secretary General for Defense Policy and Planning last month. And within NATO's international staff, Angus leads the team responsible for the alliance's capability and force planning, posture, plans, and a range of defense policy questions, including nuclear issues. Before that, he has served as Director General Strategy and International in the UK Ministry of Defence, as ambassador, UK ambassador, obviously, to the European Union's Political and Security Committee, and has worked in the private offices of 2 prime ministers. I'll invite Angus to join me on stage. And just to let you know that he will be able to take a couple of questions afterwards. So those of you watching online, I have a nice tablet to read your questions from, and anybody in the room, just when Angus has finished his opening remarks, feel free to ask questions, in the absence of which I promise you I will always have plenty of questions to ask Angus. Actually, you can now take my place. Over to you, Angus.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for that welcome. And it's very nice to be down in town, actually. If you work out at NATO, it's a little like being out in orbit. It's just easier to get back from the International Space Station than it is to get into the centre of town here in Brussels. But it's very good to be here, and I'm seriously impressed by the speakers and the guests that you have here at this event. And I think my role in a relatively short intervention is to give you a sense of how NATO is thinking about space and what we are up to at the moment. And I'm going to sort of take as a given that for an audience as sophisticated as this, I don't need to do the sort of general spiel about how space is changing in terms of the accessibility of space to a wider range of countries, and the way that technology is driving down the cost of entry into space, in the way in which the number of applications and what you can do with and from space is changing so fast, how we live in a world where space is becoming more competitive, more congested, and the kind of very complex mix of public sector and private sector enterprise that's going on. I'm kind of assuming all of that is it's the kind of thing you hear at these events over and over again, so you know it. So I'm going to try and talk about 3 things, really. Firstly, a couple of points about how we at NATO, at least, see the environment changing from a security perspective at the moment. Secondly, what we are actually up to in NATO on space at the moment. And thirdly, some pointers about debates that we think are coming and that we are going to need to grapple with. So firstly, on the security environment from a defense perspective in space, I mean, I think for the last 5 to 10 years, we at NATO, or those of us working for allies, we've had our mind very firmly fixed on the development of both Russian and Chinese space-based capabilities, in particular China's ability to start doing many of the things in space that we as the West were capable of doing from a military perspective, and the growing rise in both those countries' ability to actually disrupt and deny us the ability to maintain the space-based services on which so much of Western defense has been built over the last 50 years or so. I think we've been very focused on how both those 2 countries have their behavior in space has become more and more assertive, and at times has been pretty reckless. And we've seen the space for space cooperation shrinking very fast, to the point where it's almost now non-existent. And I think we've had to grapple with the thought that space is no longer a safe haven for Western military actors, that we need to work on the basis that a lot of what we rely on in space would be severely contested if we ever found ourselves in conflict with one of these 2 powers. And I mean, the interesting thing, we've all been talking about this at conferences for years. What we're seeing in Ukraine now is we're actually seeing it playing out in real time, as we are, by the way, on the nuclear dimension. It is not a drill. We are now seeing what modern conflict looks like. So we're seeing both Ukraine and Russia using space, and in the Ukrainian case, using it quite creatively, bringing in private sector actors in a way that perhaps we might not have anticipated before. But we're also seeing the constant attempts through jamming and cyber attacks to try and deny Ukraine the ability to use those assets. So there is a lot to learn from what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, although I think we also need to be realistic that Russia has not thrown everything into that fight that it would probably throw into a fight against us. So what are we actually doing in NATO at the moment? Well, one of the most important moments was in 2019 when NATO declared that space was now an operating domain for the alliance, so alongside land and sea and air and cyberspace. Now, in fact, NATO has been doing space for many, many years. And in fact, if you go back to the 1970s up to the 2000s, NATO actually owned satellites, something that we don't do anymore. Almost all of the assets on which NATO relies are owned by allies today. But we essentially try and do three things on space in NATO. Firstly, we try and ensure that space and operating in space is fully integrated into the core tasks that we have at NATO. And the most important of those, especially at the moment, is deterrence and defense. Secondly, we use space to support our operations in places like Iraq and Kosovo at the moment. And we are one of a number of forums in which allies can come together and learn about space, talk about space, and develop a policy. As on the nuclear side, I think one of the things we are trying to do at the moment is raise the space IQ of allies, make sure that everybody understands the implications and what is happening. The kind of things that we ask allies to provide us as an alliance, imagery and ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, SATCOMs, global positioning, and meteorological data. The bulk of that is still provided by America, but other allies have some significant capabilities as well, in particular France, but also the UK, Germany, Italy, Spain. And I thought it was interesting to hear from the Czech minister just now that, actually a wider and wider range of allies are developing capabilities, in particular industrial capabilities in this area. One thing we also did about 2 years ago was make explicit that an attack on the alliance and the alliance's assets in space or our space infrastructure could be one of the things that could trigger the invocation of Article 5. And I think that was quite important because there's a difficult set of questions we're all grappling with about just how serious is an attack on us in space. Everybody knows that damaging a satellite or blinding a satellite or even destroying a satellite is not quite the same as standing there with a gun and shooting somebody. But we need to be clear that it could constitute an attack on us that could cross the threshold of Article 5 being invoked. So that was an important message that we conveyed. Institutionally, we a couple of years ago set up the NATO Space Center, and that essentially is trying to cohere and knit together the operational work on space done by a number of allies to ensure that it's coordinated. And next year, we will also set up a NATO Center of Excellence in space in Toulouse. And that will be more forward-looking. That will be working with allies to develop the capabilities and the doctrines and the thinking of the future. So let me sort of close by just saying a few words about some of the issues that we think are coming our way and that we are now increasingly grappling with. And the Madrid summit, I can't remember exactly how many times the new strategic concept mentions space, but it's certainly once or twice because it's very much on our minds. But I think we see, 4 debates coming our way at the moment. The first, and it goes back to what I was saying about Article 5, is how do you do deterrence in space? How do you successfully convey that we have the capability and the credibility and we can communicate our intent in a way that an adversary is not inclined to test us in space or knows it will pay a price if it does, and doesn't misread our thresholds in space? And there's quite an interesting debate about, can you view space as somewhere where classical deterrence plays out, or is it inherently a bit different? And do we actually need to focus less on the ability to punish or deny an opponent, and more on issues like resilience, redundancy, just having lots of stuff so that an attack on us wouldn't stop us from operating? Or do we need to go further down the road of more active protection of our assets and our space-based networks? The second issue, and it's not just an issue for NATO, but it's how do we promote more responsible behavior? Is it possible to develop global norms on space behavior? I think knowing realistically that even if we do, that they're unlikely to constrain some countries. They're probably unlikely to constrain Russia in its current mood, and it might not constrain China or Iran either. The UK has done a lot of good work in the UN on developing space-based norms. The US made an important statement recently when it announced a ban on ASAT testing. But can the responsible nations of the world, at least, can they develop norms that hold in some way? I think a third issue is how do we make the most of the kind of industrial and technological diversity that you can see reflected on the list of companies up there. And I was just looking at them and reflecting on the mix that you've got some, dare I say it, good old-fashioned defense contractors, primes, who are now getting into the space sector, but they're sitting there alongside genuinely startup companies who have started in space and are now moving into defense. So that's quite a complex ecosystem. And then you've also got the usual mixture of big companies and small companies. And how do we as defense actors make the most of that ecosystem and develop it? One of the things being set up this year by NATO is something called Diana, which is a defense innovation hub, an accelerator. And one of the things I'll be looking at from my role is how do we integrate space into that and make sure it's one of the sectors that Diana promotes growth and promotes innovation in. And then lastly, and this is a little bit sort of military techie, but I see there are people here who understand and know that stuff. But what does what we call multi-domain operations really look like? So this is the idea that any fight in the modern world is going to have to involve all of the domains: land, air, sea, space, and cyber. At the same time, how do you in practice run such an operation or such a fight? How do you plan it? How do you control it? What are the bits of connectivity, whether technical or human, that you need to succeed in that fight? And boy, is that difficult. It really is, not least because it means getting different services, and in some cases new services in allied militaries, to work together in a way that they haven't had to do as intensely in the past. One last comment before I sit down and let you fire questions at me. NATO doesn't do any of this on its own. We're an alliance of allies. We rely on allies to provide us with capability, although we do have more scope for common funding now. And one of the things the Madrid summit did was quite considerably expand the scope for NATO common funding. So it's possible you will see us starting to do more things that we actually kind of own and run ourselves. But by and large, we look to our allies and partners to provide us with capability. The US is always big in that. I've mentioned some of the other allies, but we do look as well to cooperation with the European Union. And, we are tracking very closely and very interested in where does the European Union go in space. It's obviously got a role which it's had for many years now in the civilian sector. That is now starting to merge with where the European Union is on defense as well. So whether it's R&D or situational awareness or support to operations, I think we are keen in NATO that we develop a close understanding and partnership with the European Union on those areas. So I will stop there, Paul, and I'm very happy to be grilled as you wish.
Thank you very much. I was just trying to find out while I was fiddling with my phone to see how much time we have. Daniel, how much time do we have for questions? 5 minutes. Okay. Right. Well, wonderfully, we have a question over there. And from here. God, you've sparked some interest, Angus. Well done. If you wouldn't mind, as usual, so give me your name and your affiliation, and then fire away.
Sander Mensik from the Space Platform. Thanks a lot for the presentation. 2 questions, if I may. What are the technological priorities of NATO in the space domain? And two, if you can elaborate a bit on the fund. It was announced that NATO is creating a 2 billion, right, fund, and whether or not it will cover space within its scope.
Is that working? Yeah. So to be perfectly honest, Alexander, I'm not sure I could give you a very clear account of the tech priorities. That's not my lane in NATO speak. But on the fund, I think yes, absolutely. Both the fund and Diana, and the two things are very closely linked. I think we will want to integrate space into that. Because you can't. I mean, the reality is you can't fight in any domain now unless you have assured access to. Well, you can fight, but you're limited in what you can do. So, I think we are more and more clear that space is non-negotiable. It's just something we have to be investing in. We are about to go through the process of setting a kind of new generation of guidance and targets for allies on. Capabilities. They don't traditionally target allies to produce particular space capabilities, not least because, as I said earlier, the space is seen as one of those areas of capabilities which is very nationally controlled. But overall, we will be looking for allies to provide us with capabilities which are space enabled, and that enablement is resilient.
Thank you. There's a question for Madam there. Put your hand up so we can get the microphone to you. But 1 second, wait for the microphone, madam. Just please stand up, but
Hello,
your
good
name
morning.
and your organization.
My name is Roya Ayasia. I work with a regional network, the level next to the national state. This Diana initiative sounds very interesting to us. Is it focused on SMEs and medium-sized enterprises? And where are you with Diana?
So Diana is being set up at the moment. It will have a number of regional hubs. There'll be one in Canada. There'll be one in the UK. And yes, it definitely does include a focus on supporting SMEs. I think that's absolutely critical to the vision. Doesn't mean it excludes the big traditional defense companies at all. They are part of the ecosystem on innovation. But no, we are absolutely clear that this is a big part about trying to help, and particularly here in Europe, but all over North America as well, to develop a more innovative range of defense companies.
Any more questions in the room before I go online? Madam over there.
Good morning, Charity Whedon from Astroscale. The United States last spring announced a moratorium for direct ascent ASAT tests. Obviously, many countries have followed that lead and announced they would do the same. Many of them are NATO countries. I'd be interested to know what are responsible behaviors for NATO, and have you given that any thought? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, well, not doing ASAT tests is a pretty clear one. I think what we're trying to do is see if we can get behind what emerges from the UN system at the moment. But there is a lot of discussion going on amongst those allies who have space assets and space capabilities to kind of work out, where we think the boundaries should lie. Bearing in mind, we do need to assure our own military capability. Now, we don't need to do ASAT tests to do that, which create all sorts of trouble. But there are things we do need to do to assure our military capability. I'd need to check this. I'm afraid I don't know whether NATO has got a formal policy yet on. I've only been here a month, on what we should or shouldn't do in space, but it is a big topic of conversation amongst allies, and one of the things we are debating in NATO.
Time for one quick final question, Angus, from somebody watching this discussion online, from Mark Mayer, independent lawyer. Humdinger of a question: can civil and military space activities still be legally divided because of their dual uses in reality?
Gosh, I think I'd want legal advice before I answered that question. Look, I honestly can't answer the legal question, but I think in practical terms, increasingly the answer is no, they can't be divided. They're mutually interdependent and supportive, but also potentially sometimes disruptive of each other. So I'm not sure what the legal answer to your question is, but practically, no.
All right, we have to leave it there. We have to move on. Thank you very much, Angus, for making the time. Thank you.
So thank you to Angus, thank you to Paul, and thank you, of course, to Minister Kupke for his opening keynote presentation as well. So we are moving straight on now to our first panel of today. So if I can invite our panelists to come and join me on stage. And as they do, just to let you know what we're going to be looking at here. So the next two sessions, actually, we're going to be focusing on addressing key challenges for the European space sector, looking at some of the key challenges that the sector faces today. And in this first panel, we're going to be discussing the issue of competition versus protectionism and finding the right balance. So we're delighted, as ever, to have an expert lineup of speakers, of panelists to join us and discuss these issues. So I would, as we're settling down here, I'd like to pass over to our moderator for the session. That's Charles Galland from Eurospace. And Charles, I'll hand over to you to tell us more.
Thank you, Dan. So good morning all. Let me first allow myself to introduce a bit the topic before we move to our panel. So the space sector has shifted from an environment which is characterized by the exclusive involvement of state actors, where strategic dominance prevailed over the commercial activity, to an environment where the entrepreneurial and market-driven dimension of space activities has reached a new dimension. Space markets worldwide are today characterized by two dynamics, which are conditioning the power of action of the European space industry. So first dynamic, space markets are still mainly driven by public investment, despite the rise in the recent years of private satellite operators, which are here in the room, the largest being now located in Europe. Second dynamic, space markets are characterized as captive markets, in other words, protected. And indeed, space markets, due to various restrictions that fall within the ambit of several political, economical, social, and technological barriers, are often not accessible at the same level to all suppliers. And this is the case in the USA, in China, in Russia, in India, and Japan, where all institutional needs are exclusively served by their own national players. And this is not the case in Europe. But while open markets represent 30% of the overall space market, the European space industry still manages to capture about 37% of it, which I believe is quite remarkable. So you have understood it for this very first panel of session 5, which is addressing the key challenges for the European space sector. We are going to talk about finding the right balance between competition and protectionism. So my name is Charles Galland. I'm working at Eurospace, which is the trade association of the European space industry. And for this discussion, I'm delighted to have on stage an impressive panel composed of both institutional and private actors. So let me therefore introduce you this morning's panel. Isabella Poldrugo is a deputy head of unit at DG Defis in the European Commission, responsible for space policy, that she joined in 2019 after 10 years in the European Parliament. Michal Borista is co-founder of the newly established Slovak Space Office and the director of its industry branch, working under the Slovak Investment and Trade Development Agency. Peng Zhao is vice president of government affairs and policy at OneWeb, where is responsible of the company's international regulatory and policy issues with focus on Europe and Asia Pacific. And last but not least, Uli Leibniz, senior vice president consulting services, head of space Germany at the CGI, with a global space business which employs more than 1,000 professionals in offices across the globe. So welcome to all four of you, and I'm very much looking forward to hear your views on this key topic. So as chivalry is the direct translation of my name is French, and as we're in Brussels, I will first turn myself to our local host. So Isabella, in my introduction, I mentioned that the European space industry captures about 37% of the overall space market business. How does the European Commission sustain the competitiveness of the European space industry, which is necessary to perform in such a small portion of accessible market outside Europe?
Can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for inviting us today in the second day of the conference. Thank you to the public here and Connect to be here today. Indeed, you mentioned a lot of key elements and key topic today. This, I think, find the balance between how much to protect and how much to push to go in the open market. I think there is two means that the Commission can push forward in this direction. One is the legal aspect, and the second one is the promotion of competitiveness of the European space sector. About the legal aspects, the Commission is pushing an open strategic autonomy, so open markets, but closed when necessary. We promote a level playing field globally because, as you mentioned, the conditions are not the same around the world. So the Commission just published two new pieces of legislations, one for international public procurement and the other one about foreign subsidies disturbing the internal market. As you know, there is already a couple of years that the regulation on foreign direct investment screening is applied, and the Commission is also working together with the Parliament and the Council to the adoption of anti-coercion measures. So for sure, promoting level playing field worldwide is one of the tools that we have to let our companies compete worldwide. The second one is to promote innovation and competitiveness of the EU space sector. I think that I mentioned yesterday, but also other colleagues from the Commission, how the European Space Programme is a tool to promote the competitiveness of the space sector with almost 15 billion euro in 7 years. And there is a lot of new instruments the Commission is developing to promote the competitiveness. Horizon, I think a couple of weeks ago, last week, was published the announcement of the funds dedicated for space research in the next couple of, from this year and the previous year. So 200 million euro are being invested in 49 space research projects. And we have other tools actually used in the pipeline as the important project of common interest and the sovereignty fund that is going to be developed to make sure that the future of the industry is made in Europe. The Commission is also anchor customer in a lot of projects. I think I mentioned already yesterday how we promote the inclusion of new space companies in the European flagships as Copernicus, and how we are going to promote them in the new Secure Connectivity Initiative. But also we develop new instruments to try to take them on board, but also to flourish alone. We are also working on the launchers and access to space to promote the primes with a stable contract for the needs of the EU Space Programme, but also micro-launchers and research with the Flight Ticket Initiative together with ESA and IOD and IOV projects. So I would say both. I mean, instrument to make sure that the European companies are competing worldwide, being really top level and high performance in order to have huge competitiveness in global stage. And the second, that is not really in the remit of DG but we are strongly contributing, is for sure participating there with legal instrument to ensure a level playing field globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Now, Michal, the space sector is attracting more and more businesses from an ever-increasing number of countries, rather new to the ecosystem of well-established partnerships. This is the case for Slovakia that you represent today. So from the point of view of the Slovak Space Office, what are the most efficient mechanisms for integrating new-to-space companies to establish value chain networks in established space markets?
Thank you for the question. And first of all, thanks to the organizers for having me and having the Slovak Space Office here at the second edition of this interesting forum. Yesterday was really insightful. I'm looking forward to today's discussions. I would start with mentioning that this trend that you have mentioned is quite advantageous for Europe because, in my view, out of all regions of world, Europe has the largest untapped industry potential for space. And what I mean by that is when you take a look at the map, there is no region in the world where you have so many developed economies with strong technological companies, with knowledge-based economy, with strong R&D heritage and rich R&D heritage, and at the same time containing of so many countries which have emerging space ecosystems. And I think this is a very good base for future growth of the European space sector, with numbers of companies possessing technological capabilities to enter the space sector using what they are doing in terrestrial sectors. And this is actually one of the cases is also Slovakia of such countries. What we do in this regard, I would highlight two simple points of logic that we try to apply here. First of all, if you enter market or sector which is already dense, you have to enter with something which is unique. You have to bring some new added value to the common table. And the advantage the new coming countries have is often thanks to the new dynamic development, and at that point, the rather small ecosystem, they have certain advantages of flexibility with which they can focus on new technological trends, new markets that are being created within space. And I think that they should use it in their advantage to support really bringing new added value and complementary solutions. And we encourage our companies to do so, and we try to help them achieve these goals, mainly in two areas. First of them is spinning in, so helping already established non-space technological companies working in related sectors enter the space sector, and how you can affect this, or how you can help them go in those particular areas is simply by doing proactive targeting of particular technological capabilities of the companies, or selecting who you target with your support, with your consultancy, and with your help to enter the sector to target particular technological capabilities. Like, for example, in case of Slovakia, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, progressive material R&D, etc. Second area, and this actually, this spinning in was from the beginning of our ecosystem building quite a backbone of what we did to establish the base of the sector. Second area is startups. And here again, you can positively influence on what topics you prefer, what topics you select, for example, for activities like idea creations or hackathons, or even the incubation programs for startups. So these I would highlight as two key areas here for the implementation of how to help companies find those directions. Secondly, you have to think when entering new dense markets that, okay, I'm the newcomer, I have to walk the extra mile sometimes. And this is also what we try to get involved in through our proactive approach to B2B partnership creation, and to use of multilateral or the other forums that are aimed at bridging the newcomers with well-established players. So when speaking about the B2B part, the important here is from our perspective to make it as easy as possible for the foreign large partners to identify the partnerships in our country. So we understand that there is a little knowledge about what we have in country as capabilities and capacities which already exist. That therefore it's our aim, it's our task to make it easier for large system integrators or for other partners in the European ecosystem to get to know these capabilities and help them to figure out if there is something that would work for them as for partnerships. For this fora that I mentioned, the events or platforms to help bridging the established and developing ones, or the emerging ecosystems, here it's very good to see the growing interest of global platforms in this topic, which again I believe is truly important. Rising interest of platforms such as United Nations COPUOS, such as IAC, the International Astronautical Federation, and also the European Space Forum, which I'm really grateful for. And we try to work on this topic with many partners, including ISD Eurospace, including EURISI or International Astronautical Federation, to further help countries to share their best practices and experience in order to efficiently support these collaborations between the well-established, strong, older players and the newly emerging actors of space industry. So to conclude, I would just once again repeat that from my perspective, really the emerging space ecosystems are important for future growth of European space because yes, on one side, their emergence and their growth might in some cases create new competition between the companies, but at the same time, and this is much more important, they increase European competitiveness in general because they bring new solutions to the table and they help us utilize the full potential of Europe as a continent, as a region in space.
Thank you. Very interesting, Michel, and we will deepen that a bit later. So I will now turn myself to you, Peng. So OneWeb is at the same time a global and a European company. It is mainly owned by Bharti, an Indian conglomerate, the state of the UK, and Eutelsat, the French operator, also has a large share of the company and is recently proposing a 50-50 merger that is going through regulatory approval right now. So the European market is one of the many markets you are and you intend to serve. What has the European market to offer? How does it differentiate from other global markets in terms of access, business support? And are there barriers that may exist in other countries that are simply not present here in Europe?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank the organizer for having me here, representing OneWeb. So I think that the question is a very long word and a complex one. But yeah, from our perspective, I mean, OneWeb, we have a kind of a global kind of a shareholder structure with many that you quoted, but also we have a really strong kind of value chain in Europe as well. So I mean, we work with many of you in this room, including Airbus building our satellites, Arianespace launching our satellites in the past and in the future, but also many other like ST Engineering and Astroscale, etc. So I mean, from us, that identity, we believe ourselves as a kind of a global kind of a satellite company, and also we intend to serve global markets. But of course, the European market is very, very interesting one for us. I mean, it's a huge market, first of all, but also it has a lot of kind of a common rules and common kind of regulatory frameworks that facilitate a lot for us instead of going one by one to each countries. We have a common set of framework to work and to gain the market access. But I mean, on top of that, one example I usually give to other countries is that European market has taken the step 20 years ago to liberalize the market for a service provider like ourselves. In 2002, the European Commission abolished the concept of landing right. So basically, all the foreign and domestic satellite operator can provide the space segment to any and any ground segment can be using those different kind of suppliers. So that is very make our life much easier as kind of an international company to serve the market. But also you have a lot of other kind of regulatory frameworks. For example, a lot of ECC decisions that allow the easy kind of rollout of the user terminals, satellite user terminals, but also the liberal free circulation of those terminals across the different countries as well. So all this to say that it is very something that we consider as best practice, and we're pushing that in many other part of the world in different regions. And this level of that Isabella mentioned before is that the level playing fields and all these things. That's the kind of thing that we promote globally to the market, and many markets start to listen to those. Can give you the example of Indonesia or Philippines, who start to allow foreign companies to establish in their country and getting their kind of landing rights. So it's moving step by step towards this kind of more free and open and competitive markets. I think that's what I want to start with.
Okay,
today.
Thank you, Peng. Now, Oli, you represent CGI, a company. a company that develop and implements cutting-edge space systems. So how do you, from a CGI perspective, see the developments in the area of EU space policy with focus on competition versus protectionism?
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody in the room, and making this really an event by your personal presence. Yes, first of all, I would like to say, well, this is quite a complex topic, and we are in this world of space already for 4 decades, also in Europe. So our EU-based space activities are the gravity center of space activities. And you mentioned in the introduction, it's about 1,000 people working at CGI. No, it's slightly, we are just approaching 90,000 worldwide.
I was mentioned for space.
Yeah,
but
and
maybe-
that's perfectly true. And as I said, the main activities, and that's key, is in the EU area. So looking at the past developments in the EU space policy, I would say, and looking back to maybe 10 years, it was a great movement from purely ESA and just a little bit of space activities. But EC really has become an important player in space. So it's really appreciated to see that there are new ideas for new programs, flagship programs. So really positioning Europe more in the space arena, also globally. So I think, first of all, this in general is positive to invest in space, and that this needs some kind of regulation, regulatories, and also to control how foreign direct investments are made and so on, and how this copes with the various frameworks is, of course, a complex exercise. Now seeing what happened with implementing the EU space regulation by also announcing the strategic autonomy. The topic become even more complex. So in particular, if there is industry established in Europe, contributing to key space programs for several decades already, but now facing new legal and regulatory rules, of course, this changes something in terms of long-term planning approach, all the history and all the trustful cooperation. And in addition, this also means that, we have to find a good way between protectionism, autonomy, and the competition. That's a big challenge. So I don't put in question, and this is also for opening the discussion later on, I don't put in question that it's good to have space regulation and also to go for some kind of autonomy. But this can not just be the only pillar of thinking space. So it's more about the how and how to apply a space regulation. And later on, not to cause any collateral industry damage, and also not to pay a high political price, maybe on being too strict towards other regions in the world where we would like to make business with, but where we say, oh, sorry, cooperation in this particular area now is not possible. Then guess what? Today, tender by tender, on a case-by-case basis, the space regulation applies and makes a check on who is eligible to bid or not to bid. And it might be decided whether it's sensitive or not sensitive. So guess what? If you would like to build up a consortia, this adds risk to all the industrial discussions. So it just makes noise. It causes noise in the industry, and it needs a lot of attention. So I definitely see, as it is done currently, that it slows down space programs, that it costs money. It's not always going straight forward to the best technical approach. It imposes risk and uncertainty, and it also is a signal to other industries. And even if, and I understand the initial thoughts were made before the Ukraine crisis, we are now facing a completely changed geopolitical situation. And here, I again would like to put in question whether strategic autonomy is just the only element, or whether it's not better to think strategic autonomy by also thinking strategic partnerships. And here, and we heard it this morning, you can't think space without the military component. So it's about NATO, it's about all the partners we are in. We have different member constellations. If you talk ESA, if you talk EDF, if you talk now the European Political Committee with the 40 countries, talking also security. So I have concerns that this will be and can be well managed in terms of all the complex bilateral agreements that are also in place. And looking at our energy crisis, and space regulation, of course, has a focus on space and security. And as far as I see it, currently, strategic autonomy is very much focusing in reality on the space activities. But if you roll this out to energy and so on, and looking also at the taxation and whatsoever, taxonomy, how should this end up for Europe being a reliable international partner within a global ecosystem? I think we need a close cooperation with democratic and friendly countries. And what we also have in place, and here I also would like to put this into the discussion. On the one hand, we have a regulation and we have the legal aspects, and of course, it matters. On the other hand, in most, as far as I know, in the member states, we have governance. We have a security accreditation. We have a lot of things implemented that monitor, control companies and the national industry much closer and much more detailed than it could be done as part of a procurement activity via an administrative process. And here again, I should say that the member states should have the final say to judge on their national industry being eligible to contribute to larger space programs. Yeah, so I really think we should do it clever. I'm fully supporting any autonomy approach in some areas, which mainly means avoid strong dependencies. It doesn't mean, and I think Europe wouldn't be capable, to start in many areas with its own industry, given the limitations, as we all know, on experts and high qualified people and finding them on the market. We can't do this in an isolated manner. So the question here is how to deal with all the needs for partnerships and cooperation, but also being strong and autonomous and not slowing down things, but accelerating things. And yeah, but this is maybe my personal view, I have to say. It's not then the CTI view. If you read the news and hear the statements, just guess other regions are also starting to be more protective. So the Inflation Reduction Act, for instance, in the US with Canada and Mexico, can't this be just also some kind of reaction on Europe announcing that we would like to become more autonomous? And yeah, these are questions. It's more for discussion. It's not that I'm saying I'm right on this. It's just more about concerns I have in the way how it is currently done. And my concern is that it's not making best use of the technology and experts available. And we should relax a little bit on what is considered as EU established industry and who is really not wanted to become an industrial player. I think that's mainly the message I would like to convey here. Yeah, so that's for the start.
So thank you very much, Uli, and we'll deepen the geopolitical angle that you mentioned a bit later. So we will now go to a second round of questions. So let me recall the audience, both here in Brussels and behind the screens, that you have the possibility and you are strongly encouraged to ask questions. So I will let you think about them for the moment and then come back to you in a few minutes for the question and answer session. So now back on topic and back to Isabella. So protecting our industry in Europe is one thing, but does the Commission also promote the capabilities of the European space sector in global established and new markets? And if not, what are the elements that are preventing the Commission from doing so?
Thank you very much. But if you don't mind, I will react to the intervention of
Sure.
the previous speaker before. So maybe I will not reply directly to your answer, but more as a reaction. I think there were many elements. I will start with the end. You said that maybe the US and the new protectionist rules worldwide are the reaction of the EU. I would say the way around. As also Peng Zhao said before, the European Union went in the last years, the last decades, to really open the market as much as possible. It was a liberalization in many sectors, not only the space one. So the idea is that now we realize that maybe it was too open. This is why now we speak about open strategic autonomy. So to be as open as possible, but as close as necessary. So I think the European reaction is a reaction to the others, because I think that Commissioner Breton repeatedly several times that the naivety, to be naive has to be finished. So obviously we want to attract investment, want to have our industries compete worldwide. We want to have partnership and have also a lot of attract investment and companies in the EU, but also we have to protect our security and public order. This is, for example, the key in the foreign direct investment regulation. But also we have to be conscious, as was said before also by NATO, that space is going towards strong use in security and defense dimension. So obviously, if you use space services, so you have space infrastructure that are key for the security of European citizens, you have to ensure the resilience of supply chain, the resilience of infrastructure, and not to be too much dependent from non-EU companies or partners. But against this background, obviously, we say, and the European Space Program is open. Strategic partnership, I think, were mentioned also by the Commission of the European Union in the SOTEU, so in the speech of the year from the European Union. Strategic partnership are key with all the countries as Canada, US, our allies, not only in space, but in many other sectors. I think that the regulations set clear rules. I want to remember that member states are the co-legislator together with Council and Parliament are the co-legislator. The Commission proposed a regulation. So at the end, member states are in both sides, in the Council and in the Parliament, to shape the rules. And member states are also participating in the SAB, so the Security Accreditation Board, that is the one that gives the waiver to the participation of companies in some part of the space program are composed by experts from member states. So they are fully involved, and they are the one that ask us to be more resilient and more EU, let's say like this. But many other parts of the space program are open to everyone. Horizon Europe is an open program, and linked to Horizon, I will also go back to the partnership, as Slova colleague said before. Horizon Europe is a good example of partnership across member states, because obviously the more you involve different partners, the more you have the possibility to have good proposal and to receive then funds. So, and speaking about strategic partnership and strategic dependency, look at launchers. We had good partnership with Rosmokosmo, was working very well. And all in a sudden, we have a satellite that we cannot launch because we were too dependent. And this is key because obviously now we don't have autonomous access to space, and we are facing is not a problem of the next months because the constellation is fully operational. But it creates obviously some big issues at the moment. I think we discussed also launchers yesterday. So yeah, going back also to what said before, I think that indeed we need to be again as open as possible, really attract investment, also because investment are key to the flourish of the EU space countries. We have Cassini now. We are really trying to have a full European ecosystem across Europe. So working on the primes and on the flagship programs, but also really a flourish of the space ecosystem in all European member states, because it was said before, there is space for everyone in space in different levels. We have a really state-of-the-art space ecosystem, and the EU space program is the best promotion that the Commission, or at least the GDFIS, can do for space worldwide, because they are providing state-of-the-art services, but it's providing them because we have state-of-the-art companies. And I think is the best business card you can give around. But again, we are not to be naive. We have to be conscious of our dependencies. So that is why we speak about not autonomous, but also non-dependency. So have partnership, but also be really conscious about the key elements that we need to protect and in which we need to be resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. So yeah, if I understand well, the right balance is both as open as possible and at the same time strategic autonomy, non-dependence. Thank you. So Michal, back to you. Space in Slovakia is booming, and you're constantly promoting it. So there are many industries in the room. What are the reasons for an established company to invest in Slovakia? What does your supply chain have to offer? What are the strengths of Slovak companies in terms of capabilities, of course, but also in the way they are doing business, maybe differently?
Thank you for this question. It's difficult to answer this in a way so it does not sound like a sales pitch. So I will probably not even try. But on the other hand, since Slovakia is now, after several days ago, becoming the newest associate member of European Space Agency, it might be beneficial to mention a couple of points here. I would probably sum it up in 5 key reasons. So first of them is heritage. So we often say that we have an emerging space ecosystem. What we really mean that we are new to the industry building when it comes to space, but it does not really mean that we are new to space. Our researchers have been involved in space hardware research and development in 70s. So it's already quite some decades being involved in this area. And as also Minister Kupka mentioned earlier, Czechoslovakia was, after United States and Soviet Union, the 3rd country sending a person to space, and Slovakia had one more crewed mission in 90s. So for a small country, 2 crewed missions, it's not that bad. So heritage is definitely there, and now we are trying to utilize it by technology transfer from the academia to business. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, it's dynamics. You well pointed out that there is this dynamic growth in our sector. Currently, space economy in Slovakia, that means approximately 40 companies working in both upstream and downstream, with strong key areas being, for example, satellite component R&D focused on, for example, sensors and mechatronical components. Then a strong area in space safety, in Earth observation applications, or, for example, progressive material R&D, or solutions for space supply chain management. So this is number 2. That would be the dynamics. Point number 3 would be something I already mentioned in my first answer, and that's the flexibility. So having a relatively small young space ecosystem sometimes gives this benefit of adapting more quickly to changes in the market, and we try to proactively use it to focus these new emerging technological areas and new emerging markets, and help companies, for example, working with AI, with cybersecurity, and other topics which are now really up to date to these new emerging markets, to help them get involved. So that flexibility would be number 3. Number 4 would be the untapped potential. Again, I covered it a little bit in the first answer, but to go a little bit more in detail, so untapped potential, I think this is something that every emerging space country, emerging space ecosystem should, as step number 1, identify what the potential really is. In our case, it was mainly the academia potential, so the technology transfer, along with the involvement of our researchers in 70s, what I mentioned. So there has been continuous involvement in international missions from our research people, and they were working on such important global projects like JUICE, like Rosetta or Bepi Colombo. So they've had, over these all last years and last decades, strong involvement, and now we are trying to transfer this knowledge to business through collaboration between academia and business. And second strong potential source we identified is the spinning in potential. So the non-space technological companies working in related areas like high precise machinery, like electronics, like IT, and having particular technological capabilities that we can see, take, and help them utilize in space sector, in various domains of space sector. So that's point number 4. And well, point number 5, I hope that point number 5, to collaborate with Slovakia and to possibly work with companies or invest and set up direct footprint in Slovakia will be the Slovak Space Office. So we are trying really to be the reason and be the supporting tool for our foreign partners to consider Slovakia as an interesting possibility for establishing new collaborations with industry partners. And this is what we do every day, work with our partners, with LSI, with the European space value chain, to help them get to know what we have and help them utilize this knowledge and start up new partnerships here. So, and last but not least, we are part of the investment and trade development agency. So even for the direct footprint setup, we have a lot of services to help our partners with.
Thank you, Michel. So do not hesitate to take your tickets to Slovakia. It has a lot to offer in space, but also in cultural, historic, etc. It's a beautiful country. Peng, in the light of what Isabella said, do you think that there is a need to rethink the way things are done in Europe, particularly when it comes to the balance between protecting domestic space companies versus providing a more open market that encourages competition?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And let me first react to some thing that Isabella said a bit earlier. It's like she gave an example of the Roscosmos and collaboration over there. And we, of course, as OneWeb, we were at the receiving end of that. And or we had to cancel our launch once the war started. But of course, the further development on that is that last weekend, we managed to resume our launch schedule from India. So we managed in a really kind of a record time to secure new launch vehicles in India, but also in the US with SpaceX in the future. So that was something that we managed to achieve in a record time within 6 months. And that was only possible because we were, looking globally at kind of all the supply chain on the kind of on the launch vehicles, for example. So that's something that we were really happy to be able to do. And of course, now with the latest launch of 36 satellites, we now have 462 satellites in the sky in orbit now, and we are one of the only 2 LEO constellations that is providing commercial services already. So we provide service in Alaska and Canada and Northern Europe. In fact, we already have coverage. So coming back to the question of protectionism and all this is, I think protectionism is kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, it can help you in providing a bit more autonomy, but also it can have some limitation as well. So from our perspective, for example, when you build LEO constellations, all the satellites, or 462 satellites, are constantly moving over the sky. So they're moving over the country that we want to serve, and then they move to the next country. So at some point, each point on the world has only like 2 or 3 minutes visibility of that particular satellite. That's the time where it has really the usage of that particular satellite. And the rest of the time, 98% of the time, it's over some other countries, and it's usable to other peoples if they have market access. So when you build a constellation like this, a LEO constellation specifically, so you want to have provide service in your region, but also to monetize your network, you have to have market access in other countries as well. So then it comes to the question like, would the other country or the region allow you, market access, landing right, etc., if you don't allow them? So that's the kind of a question that's is more from the commercial side. Of course, it's not for the for the government and the defense, but it is something that when you build a constellation, you really have to keep that in mind. That's very different than the GEO world, GSOs, where you can concentrate your spot bin to one particular place, and in fact, it gives you more capacity in that particular place. But when it's LEO, your satellite is constantly moving. So just after a while, it's just not usable anymore over your sky, and it could be useful to someone else. But just come back also to another point, like some of the defense, U.S. DoD, for example, even if it's for their mission critical kind of communications, but they buy satellite service from everyone basically. I mean, they buy service for many other GSO player in this room, but also they buy from many LEO, at least from two of the LEO constellation as well. So from their perspective, that's what will provide them with the redundancy. That's what will provide them with the resilience, and that's something that I think there's more kind of demand, especially in the LEO world, than supply at this point of time. So I mean, they don't want to limit themselves to the to only selecting their national player, for example.
Thank you, Peng. So Uli, in your first intervention, sorry, you talked about the geopolitical context, which is quite a challenge right now. So how do geopolitical trends affect your business opportunities, and what benefits or risks are arising as a result?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I think in general, the geopolitical developments affect all our business. So if you're a large industry and you are presented around the globe, as we are in 40 countries and in 24 EU countries, for instance, of course you have to react. And it was quite easy for space when it was all about ESA, then it was about Brexit to cope with that one. So if you have had a UK-based business, as not only us, but also other companies, you had to do something, you had to react. So you had to establish boundaries. You had to decouple the business, all the approval loops, all the governance on these projects. And also now with the EU, of course, in our organization, we have taken care on this, and we have established a lot of mechanisms that respect all the requirements related to data protection and to avoid that any blocking situation could be created to block our activities in EU space programs, for instance. And this has been done. I think most of other companies are also doing this. But in general, since we are not only in space, but also other industries, basically we follow our clients. So if the clients react on geopolitical changes, we just move. Yeah? We just, so if they say we stop our business in certain regions, we do the same. On the other hand, given compliance rules and so on, we are, of course, running a long-term and very detailed assessment before establishing business in geographies around the globe. And that's quite key. So you have to protect yourself that you do not end up in situations where you could create conflicts and also where you breach compliance rules. And that's definitely one thing. And this become more and more mature, more and more important related to the geopolitical changes we are currently facing. So here I think it's good, and then it's basically about partnerships, the trusted partnerships. So in the commercial area, you are quite free, as we heard already this morning. Yes, coping with the space security means that you have to accept that there are certain rules. Sometimes competition is more open or less open. Would be great to always see the criteria, whether a specific program or procurement will be open or not as soon as possible, to allow an efficient approach here. So I think this needs some catalog criteria where you can do this planning. And on the other hand, the geopolitical changes itself are not a problem, because there were always changes going on. And sometimes you have, unfortunately, conflict regions around the globe. It's not a big deal. You have to monitor it on a serious basis, and then it's fine. So I wouldn't say that the business opportunities per se, or number of business opportunities goes down driven by a conflict or changes in geopolitical area. You just have to transform as you have. But hey, we are doing digital transformation, so it's also possible for us to react on geopolitical changes.
Thank you, Uli. So if there's no reaction from the panel to your statements, I will thank you very much. And we have about 15 minutes now to answer questions from the audience. So I therefore turn myself to you in Brussels and to you behind your screens. So do not hesitate to seize the opportunity to ask questions. I can see we have one here, Olivier Lemaitre from Eurospace.
Thank you, Charles. I guess it's more a question for Isabella. I remember that in 2017 already, Eurospace issued a paper about the need for the EU to support the competitiveness of industry, not only in research and development, but also with economic diplomacy activities. So we have seen some movement since a few years regarding the promotion of Galileo and Copernicus. But my question is, are there any intention at the Commission level to do more than that and to support European industry in their exports? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you for the question. In 2017, indeed, I was not still yet in the Commission. No, but I'm joking. As I mentioned before, the best tool we have to promote European space is to showing how good we are in providing on services and technologies. There is indeed some activities on economic diplomacy. I think it was even mentioned in the regulation, as was mentioned in the space policy, in the communication space policy of 2016. There is increasing activities with our colleagues in the Commission of INTPA, indeed, and we have a collaboration with many foreign countries as Africa, and now with Latin America is the new emerging sector and countries. Is limited what it can do, because in any case also we have to respect level playing field globally, and these more activities are done by member state or by horizontal activities, so not focused on space, but for industry in general. But indeed, we are reinforcing our collaboration also within the Commission to this promotion, and let's see what will bring in the next months, I would say.
Yes, we have a question here in the front right. And please do not hesitate to state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hi, Julian Deutsch with Bloomberg. I have a question because last week we saw parliamentarian Andrus Ansip. He raised some questions about 36 OneWeb satellites that have been left in Russian custody. He was saying that this poses or raises questions that this might pose a risk to EU citizens, EU companies, EU armies. As we have a representative from OneWeb here, I was curious if you have a comment on that, if this does pose a risk for other OneWeb satellites. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And obviously the cancellation of the launch was not by our choice, of course. But I think as soon as we realized that we had to cancel the launch, the 36 satellites was stored there, and we carried out some independent security analysis to make sure that it doesn't pose any risk or any threat to our kind of existing satellite that is already in orbit and our constellation in general. So that independent security came back with a few recommendations which we implemented as quickly as possible, and we are certain there's no further risk that's posed to the constellation at this point. Thank you.
Someone else in the room? Otherwise, I have an online questions. Yes, here.
Thank you very much, Stefano Agnelli from Eutelsat. A question for Isabella Podrugo. In the situation created by the war in Ukraine, we discovered that one of the weak points in terms of security, as far as satellite communication are concerned, is the ground segment. We had the presentation yesterday from the former Newtech, now ST Engineering, which used to be one, if not the only one, European manufacturer of the ground segment that is no longer, let me say, purely European. So in terms of security of the end-to-end communication as intended for the EU secure connectivity, what are the measures that the Commission intends to put in place in order to ensure that the end-to-end security is guaranteed, namely as far as the ground segment is concerned? Thank you very much.
I think I cannot answer to your question. I mean, the regulation is still under negotiation, so the Commission proposed some legal requirements, but obviously the regulation is not yet finalized. I think there was even a panel yesterday on secure communication, so it was the right place to make the question. Generally, I can say there is, few tools, many tools, but I want to mention two. One is obviously the supporting of the flourish of an European ecosystem. So not to flourish, but I would say to keep the European ecosystem in the same good shape as it is today, and to attract more and more SMEs and startups. I think the Slovak example is a very good example how you can ensure more resilience in space infrastructure. And then obviously now we are working, the Commission released last week a Council recommendation proposal for the resilience of infrastructure in general. And there is a very good example that how we need to protect space system infrastructure, both in space but also in ground. Ground segment is in any case covered by the directive that will be approved. No, it's already approved. It has to be published soon by the end of the year on the protection of critical infrastructure. And so I think there is already a few good examples of how we can promote this, but for the regulation itself, let's see, I hope in couple of months, the final text. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Another one in the back.
Hi, sorry, Koen Willems, ST Engineering, UTech. So I have the answer. So we have guidelines for EDF. We have the Space Law, Article 24 on eligibility, and there are certain conditions in there. And what we did, we created a proxy. So basically, a proxy is very known in the US, etc. So it's where you're no longer under control of, in our case, of a non-EU entity, and that IPR remains in Europe, and that development is done in Europe, and that you have a certain level of independent activities to make yourself eligible for participation in the EU. So that's why we're also coordinator for the European Protected Waveform. That's why we're also selected for other European programs. So there are methods in place, there is policy in place, and we can act upon that. So we changed organization. We got also from our shareholders the green light, because they bought us, but then afterwards they need to push us away again, right? So there is a firewall. But okay, they took that risk, and sorry for my throat, but it's something that's already in place, and I think that it's workable. It's not perfect, it's workable. The only thing is that indeed that there are still a lot of discussions on the EU level where eligibility is being questioned, and that there is no coordination between the different agencies, and that in the end the question is pushed towards the nations. So there should, and at the national level, there should be an agency that is responsible for the eligibility, right? So the decision is no longer taken on the EU level, but it's taken on a national level. But the nations are not organized. That's the issue. So who is going to take the charge, or who is going to take the leadership or the responsibility to say that a certain country is eligible or not? So there is a mechanism in place. It's not perfect yet, but we hope that it will become better over time. Thank you.
So maybe Isabella, if not Uli, after.
No, I mean, obviously I know about ODF and Article 24. I was referring to the space connectivity that is still under negotiation. Indeed, even Article 24 foreseen the possibility to have waivers. And as I said before, I mean, we try to be as open as possible. Also to ensure that if there is not EU alternatives, we are in any case able to go forward with the development and deployment of the program. About national competencies, obviously the problem is not the problem. The issue is that security issues, member states are very keen to keep them, and it's understandable. And we can try to support there to better also the security screening. But again, it's national competence. We cannot do so much to enter into their national organization.
Uli, please.
Yes, thanks for the comments from ST. So welcome to the club. So a lot of things you did, we did also on our side. That's the only way you can do. You can stay in the business. But as you also know, as I mentioned before, doing this on a case-by-case basis for each tender really is a huge burden for a lot of people involved, not in industry, but also institutions and all the national member states. And here, from my perspective, I think the aim should be companies like ST or others that are established for decades in Europe and fully embedded in the space ecosystem. We should consider them as a EU established business. And this should not depend on counting shares that might lead to some theoretical scenarios that could lead to situations which are blocked by internal measures in any case. So we are always ready, as some other companies, to go for some kind of assessment with the aim to go for a whitelist approach and saying, well, there are some trusted partners and we put them on the list, given the cooperations we have also on NATO level and so on. That would be my wish 8 weeks before Christmas.
Thank you, Uli. I will now move to an online question, so maybe more targeted to Isabella again. There's a question from Mark Meyer, which is an independent lawyer, but of course, industry is, of course, invited to respond as well. So how can we push the development of national space laws to get a clear regulation in the way of the Outer Space Treaty and the long-term sustainability guidelines of UNOSA?
Again, national competence and national competence. And you say for the treaties, we have shared competence, the union and the member states. So we do what we can, but there is a lot for a member state to work on space. Indeed, in any case, the European Union with the European External Action Service and with support of DG Defense is participating in the UN bodies. And we are also involved in the long-term sustainability guidelines. We are building an EU position, also gathering from contribution from member states, but also was very clear what member state told us. I mean, we can contribute what is more on common ground, but we will keep national activities national. And we reply, because I think it's an ongoing questionnaire from in the UN bodies by national with national answer, but indeed there will be also an EU one, also because the European Union is very active in the application of the guidelines. I think you will after a panel on space traffic management, so we'll cover this aspect later.
Indeed, and that's a good transition because we have another question on space traffic management, but I advise the person who asked, so Marco Ruiz Reda, to stick with us this afternoon. I think then it's this afternoon, the panel on space traffic management. I think the question is more suited. So we have 1 minute, which allows me to ask a very last question and expect from you 1 word, 1 sentence. So the overall session is entitled Addressing Key Challenges for the European Space Sector. So for you, in 1 word, 1 sentence, what is the biggest challenge facing Europe's space sector today? I don't know who wants to go first. Michel, please.
Well, this is going to be completely subjective, so I will not even try to put it as some key challenge for everybody. But I will stick with what I was saying in my previous answers, and I would say that at least one of the key challenges is the inclusiveness and integration of all the stakeholders for the common benefit of European space.
Uli, please.
Yeah, I would maybe answer in a little bit different direction. I think the key challenge for space is further to promote how relevant it is for our daily life and how essential it is for so many industries. And that any investment in space, be it on national or EU level, is essential, is key. It's not only space with view to security, it's space exactly in our daily life. And so also facing climate change challenge and so on. I think that's the key challenge still, to tell all our citizens that investments in space are key for so many things. And so also more budgets should be found also from the digital world and education whatsoever in order to bring forward investments in space. Oh, sorry, long sentence, sorry.
That's all right. Peng, maybe, yeah?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I will go with the time and urgency. I think there's a lot of, since COVID, there's a lot of kind of demand for digitalization, etc. That's came right after, but also with the current geopolitics and the Ukraine situation, there's a lot of demand of connectivity in Ukraine and around Ukraine and all the things, and that's it. Just try to solve that as quickly as possible and to bring the solution. Technical solution to that is quite critical on how we can react as fast as possible as industry, but also for the institutions to say how quickly can we really implement a project as well.
Thank you. So Isabella, you started and you have the privilege to close the session.
I can only agree what was said before. I mean, the importance of space in our everyday life is increasing, and people have to be conscious of it. But people also on the street, because it's an enabler for the economic growth, but it's an enabler for everyday life, from agriculture to education, industry, but even as I always say, if you buy a pizza and you ask a deliverer to bring it to you, you can follow the rider exactly where he have, and with Galileo we'll be able to follow it with 20 centimeter precision. So how far is your pizza from your stomach? So indeed I agree that is an enabler in the economy, but it's also an enabler for the to better our everyday lives.
Thank you. So dear panelists, thank you very much for your openness and your key inputs. So I think they deserve from all of you a big round of applause.